So I'm watching JoJo's Bizarre Adventure for the first time in my life, and I just caught up to part 5, and we have a lot to talk about because Golden Wind has been the most narrative-centric JoJo's part so far. And that's a big compliment because JoJo's narratively has always hit the ball out of the park. So for this to be the cream of the crop above my favorite JoJo's part so far, part 4, that's saying a lot. You know, that's a good thing. And where Golden Wind ranks it after I finished it is still a mystery even to me. Top 1? I don't know. That's a tough choice. But top 2, top 3, most definitely. As always, a lot of y'all in the comment section were like, you're gonna love part 5, you're gonna love part 5, and you know, of course, I did. You guys know me better than I know myself. Or maybe y'all just assumed that something would be wrong with me if I didn't like part 5, because, I mean, how could you not? Golden Wind had a very strong introduction. We learned a lot of stuff in the first couple episodes alone. Like Giorno being the son of Dio for one. That was a pretty big shock. I remember reading a comment, I believe it was on the part 3 video. I even gave it a heart. It said something along the lines of like, imagine if Dio had a son. And you know, I didn't know any better. So I was like, let me give this comment an upvote. That would be silly. Dio having a son. In my mind, Dio is just like asexual. I don't know. I didn't think Dio had anything in mind other than taking over the world. I thought, you know, he had no time for fornication, but I guess he did because he's the father of a pretty awesome main character. The whole main cast, honestly, awesome. I don't think that there is a single weak member within the main cast. I would go as far as to say that this is the best main cast that we've had for any JoJo's part so far, in my opinion, of course. You know, even above part 3. And part 3, for all the flaws that it might have had, the main cast was most certainly not one of them. And to me, after finishing part 5, this is either toe-to-toe or it's better than the part 3 main cast. It's that good. In fact, we have part 3 characters returning in part 5, which I did not have on my bingo card. You know, it hasn't been uncommon for a person from the part previous to make an appearance. Like from part 1, Speedwagon appears in part 1, he also appears in part 2. Then we have Joseph, who appears in part 2, and then he appears in part 3. Jotaro appears in part 3, and then he appears in part 4, so on and so forth. Very rarely do you have a character from 2 parts back make an appearance 2 parts later. I think the only character that's done that so far has been Joseph, who appeared in part 2 and part 4, and Dio, who appeared in part 1 and part 3. You know, which is to say that you have to be quite the prestigious character to appear 2 parts later. So when we got the Koichi appearance in part 5, I can't say that I was too surprised because we always have a couple characters crossing over from part to part. In fact, I was honestly surprised that there weren't more characters from part 4, like no Josuke. I was a little surprised that Jotaro made his appearance because that would make him the 3rd character to appear in a part 2 parts later from his introduction, you know, joining Elite Company alongside Dio and Joseph. But I was completely blown away, and I know I'm getting ahead of myself, when Polnareff came back, because that's somebody that was just completely off the radar. So far, it was just 2 main characters and literally the main antagonist of JoJo's. It's Dio, right? But Polnareff came back in part 5. Now, the first thing that crossed my mind, as I think should be with anybody, is, you know, didn't you get enough screen time? No, I'm joking. I love Polnareff, right? And like I just said, the part 3 main cast is one of my, it's top 2, right? So seeing characters from the part 3 main cast make an appearance in part 5, you know, much welcome. And I'll get to his impact and his purpose in part 5, but I gotta get back to the part 5 main cast, which is home to some of my favorite characters in all of JoJo's. So we already talked about Giorno, of course. So next in line is Bruno, and I'll keep it short, I'll keep it sweet, simple. My favorite JoBro in all of JoJo so far. I remember when I finished part 2 and I was like, is there gonna be a character better than Caesar? Because oh my gosh, I love Caesar. And there were so many of y'all in the comment section like, oh, there's way better side characters than Caesar. So I watched part 3 and I didn't see him. I watched part 4, still didn't see him. So I'm starting part 5 and I'm like, I have yet to see a JoBro better than Caesar. Have people been lying to me? No, you guys have not been lying to me. I just haven't gotten to Bruno. I haven't been patient, and it didn't take long for Bruno to become my favorite JoBro. I would say it was by like the train arc when they were on the train, and Bruno was a refresher because I was just coming off of part 4, and part 4, again, as much as I loved it, I had a lot of positive things to say about part. When do I not? Like, when do I not have positive things to say about JoJo's? But you know, part 4 was my favorite up until then. But one aspect of part 4 that I can point to and say that's not a strong suit is most definitely the JoBro. But Bruno was the man, you know, the androgynous man that is a character, had no flaws, no downsides, no weak points, just a completely whole character that was extremely well written and also extremely cool, extremely hype. Had an amazing stand, by the way. Sticky fingers. I like calling his stand Zipper Man more. Like it's on the nose, but that's what it's Zipper Man. Like, but as for the reason I call his character whole, is it is a completely fleshed out character from start to end. He has a tragic backstory, as you'll soon find out. Literally every single character in the main cast has a tragic backstory, and I like that. Not that I like them suffering, of course, but I like the fact that they all have this one thing in common, and it brings them together and it makes them feel like a group. And that's the key to having a strong main cast, is making sure that they synergize and they coalesce well. That's what part 3 did better than any other part so far. Part 5 just outdid that. But back to Bruno, he is the son of 2 parents who are getting divorced, and he's forced to pick between his mom and his dad, which he ends up picking his dad. But sometime later, his father actually almost ends up dying. He does die due to complications because of an attack caused by, I don't even know if I could say that word. I don't even know if I could say that. But essentially, Bruno's father ends up dying over something far more sinister than creatine. And that essentially is how he develops his hatred towards substances. And that's what creates his goal to take down Diavolo. Very strong character, very strong motives. I'm quite the sober man myself. And this is a goal and an ambition that he shares with Giorno, which is how Giorno eventually becomes part of the squad. And the rest of the squad is just as good as Bruno, because if Bruno isn't my favorite, then the runner-up would most definitely be Narancia. Narancia, tragic backstory like the rest of the cast. And it shapes his character all throughout part 5 up until the moment he dies, especially around the time where the crew is forced to pick between abandoning the mission or going with Bruno and potentially dying to Diavolo. He's kind of like the child of the group, the dumb one, the one that's easy to pick on. But man, is he always there when he's needed. He's reliable. And probably the coolest thing about him is that he has the Aerosmith stand, which that's badass. I always liked Narancia's character, but it really grew on me in that moment where he decided to tag along with Bruno and the rest of the crew for the sake of Trish, because he saw himself in Trish, and because of that he was willing to put himself in a situation where he could potentially die. But we find out at the end of part 5 it was fate. Narancia was bound to die. That sounds messed up. Abbacchio also dies. Transition. Another character of the main cast that I think I like every character of the main cast. I do. There's not one weak link. But Abbacchio is a former cop, and he has been living with the guilt of knowing that he inadvertently was the reason that a fellow cop died. And the way that this is all wrapped up in his death scene, when we find out that Abbacchio is actually talking to the cop that died on him that day, it was great. I like how JoJo's is able to be silly, funny, off the wall, full of memes, and then just get super real on us. Just get extremely real. You know, it's all about balance, and I think part 5 was almost perfect when it came to striking that balance. So far, I've been loving the part 4 serious to unserious ratio. Part 5, second best. Mista is a weird one for me. I really started off liking Mista a lot. I felt like the more that the series went on, the more he annoyed me. that might be blunt. But again, part of the main cast, not one member that I don't like. His backstory was probably the weakest out of all the characters in the main cast. His stand was probably the least interesting out of all the members in the main. I'm kind of dunking on him right now, but trust me, I liked him. And we haven't talked about Fugo yet, which is one of the more interesting characters in the main cast, because he's the only one that decided not to tag along with the rest of the crew after they had encountered Diavolo. And I'll tell you how I felt about that in the moment and after I finished part 5, because it was two very different reactions. Because in the moment when he made that decision, I'm like, oh, he'll be back. I'm thinking very shonen like right now. I'm like, what do shonens do? Epic return, maybe a cool entrance, saves the day, whatever, he'll be back. He doesn't come back. And now that I finished part 5 and I realize he actually doesn't come back, I love that call. Amazing call to have him not come back. Not because I dislike him, of course not. I think that's what makes his character so much more interesting now that I've caught up to part 5. But this decision to have Fugo not come back actually gave me an idea of a future JoJo's video that I intend on making, where I rank every character from every main cast of every part. Whatever. I'll think of a title later. But that made me realize the decision to not bring him back, the decision to just write his character off there, made him far more interesting than if he would have came back in a shonen protagonist type of way. Again, I love the comedy aspect of JoJo's. I love when it's funny. I mean, I love Joseph, right? He's probably the funniest Joestar so far. But I'm here for all the moments when JoJo's gets real. And seeing Fugo ponder mortality because his crew, his friends, are going up against the boss, and him having to step away because of that is such an interesting decision. And I like that he's the only one that stayed behind, because it makes that trait unique to his character. That's what defines him now, in my eyes. So I suppose the last character of the main cast that we've yet to talk about is Trish. She didn't really do anything for me. Not a bad character by any means, just my opinion. She's kind of just like, literally, like that's exactly how I feel. So at first she's introduced as like this plot device and like, oh, the main cast, we gotta protect her, and boy do they protect her. But then I feel like her character doesn't really evolve much past that. She's the daughter of Diavolo, and Diavolo wants to kill her. We see her gripe with the fact that she doesn't know her father, but despite that, Diavolo is still causing so much turmoil in her life. She develops a stand in one of the episodes, and that's it, I guess. Is that it? I don't know. Might be. But I want to go back to Giorno because he's the main character, of course, so the plot follows him and his desire to get these substances off the streets. We see him do a lot of bad things, and we see him kill people. That was badass. That was awesome. One thing I really liked about Giorno and the way his character was handled, we find out that he's the son of Dio. And the first couple episodes, we see Jotaro and Koichi kind of investigate him to see if he's all right, if he's gonna be a problem later on in the future. And they ultimately decide he's fine. He's a good guy. He's solid. And from there on out, we don't really get much mention again that he's Dio's son. They don't hammer it in. We know it's a pain point of his. We know it's the reason that he had such a painful past, but it's not repeated. It's not constantly brought up, and I like that. And the reason I like that is it makes it feel like Giorno being Dio's son is almost an afterthought, because Giorno and his personality reflects this. Dio's son second, Joestar first. So I can appreciate that, and at most, aside from the original introduction and the original reveal that he's Dio's son, we get a couple, references, poses that he poses like Dio, stuff like that. Very cool. Didn't go over my head, but again, all of that is an afterthought. But after the crew takes on the mission to escort Trish to Diavolo, they start getting targeted by this group, and to be honest, I don't think I care about anybody other than Risotto, right? He was that guy. Everybody else was kind of just not that interesting aside from their stand fight. Cool stand fight, cool Narantra fight. I like that fight. I don't really like the character. Risotto though is the outlier, and I think his interaction with Doppio is what really elevates him. Now Doppio and Diavolo, those are some of the most interesting characters in the series, of course. They're the main antagonists of part 5. They're described as having two souls that reside within one body, and we see how it plays out. Doppio is he's hilarious. Despite inhabiting the same body as Diavolo, he refers to him as boss and only contacts him when he acts like a nut job. And his fight with Risotto was really when this revelation happened that, oh, this is a weird guy. Two souls, same body, you knew something was up. His stand, King Crimson, is very interesting. At first, I thought it reminded me of the world, the whole concept of time and whatnot, but it's more about fate. And I realized that the author has something for fate. Somebody told me in part 6, watch out for the concept of fate thematically, right? I noticed this all the way back in part 4, specifically with Bites of the Dust. We see a little bit more fate talk here in part 5, especially with the final episode of part 5, which I thought was a brilliant way to just put a bow on everything. It was a perfect finale. From what I'm getting, King Crimson allows him to see the predetermined paths of everybody that's caught in it. So boom, King Crimson activates. Diavolo is now able to see the course of action that somebody will take within the next 10 seconds, and they are bound to take that course of action because that course of action is fate, and as we know in JoJo's, fate cannot be changed. I'm glad I was able to recall that moment in part 4 with Bites of the Dust when Kira says that fate is unable to be changed. Even despite all the Bites of the Dust loops, it's unable to be changed. It's gonna happen. That seems to be a prevalent trend even in part 5, and it's why Diavolo was so confused when he lost to Gold Experience Requiem. Now the Requiem stands is something that I haven't even talked about it yet, because I haven't even talked about Diavolo's connection to the stand arrows. There's so much in part 5. It's, again, very narrative focused, and I love me some good narrative. But Diavolo had found himself a couple stand arrows in Egypt, sold some of them off to the old hag that Dio was with. Then that's how Dio was able to get his stand. Then the events of part 3 happen. From there, if I remember correctly, Polnareff goes out on an expedition to track him down, and they get into a fight where Diavolo literally just amputates and tears Polnareff limb from limb. Damn. And that's how we get to this whole mess. And Polnareff bringing a stand arrow because he says that's Diavolo's only weakness, and you gotta stab your stand with a stand arrow. And if you follow all those steps, if you follow that map, maybe one day you too will have an aura farming stand like Silver Chariot Requiem. Words cannot describe how epic that design is. Words cannot describe how cool Silver Chariot Requiem is. The concept of Requiem stands with stabbing your own stand with a stand arrow, that's when part 5 elevated. I mean, I always thought part 5 was really good. I thought part 5 was up there contenders with part 2 and part 4, but the concept of Requiem stands, now I'm very intrigued. So far, the only 2 Requiem stands that we have seen have been Gold Experience and Silver Chariot. Silver Chariot did a whole lot of looking cool, looking badass, being sick, and walking around and just kind of wandering mindlessly, just wandering, right? Just walking around with a stand arrow. I've gotten so ahead of myself at this point. I don't even know how we ended up at the fight in Rome already, but we're here. Hey, What can I say? You know, around this time is where we get the death of Narancia, the death of Bruno, and I've just come to expect it. At the end of every JoJo's part, the main cast is all they're just gonna die, you know? Not much you can really do about it. I mean, it's good writing. You want to make the main antagonist look imposing. What's a better way to look imposing than by killing Narancia, right? You know, that's my guy. Oh, and speaking of deaths, I thought Polnareff was dead as well, but, you know, fortunately, he lives on to maybe get screen time in part 6, 7, 8, 9, who knows? But he lives on as a turtle now. Which, you know, not the most bizarre thing I've seen in the show. And around this time is when they fight for the stand era and whatnot, and we get Gold Experience Requiem, which was not as cool as Silver Chariot Requiem design wise, but ability wise, I don't even know what it is, to be honest. Of course, feel free to let me know in the comment section if I do get something wrong or if I'm mistaken about something. You know, from my comprehension, it just seemed like you thought that happened. Actually, that didn't happen. Actually, it hasn't even started happening. Like, well, sounds pretty busted in my opinion. And it's what allows Giorno to beat Diavolo in the end. And Diavolo suffers the worst fate out of any character in the worst fate out of any character in JoJo's. I thought Cars had it bad. Little did I know what would happen to a lot of the antagonists in later parts, but this is the worst fate suffered by any antagonist. And now that I've got into this part of the video, I realized I've talked about Diavolo's backstory. I've talked about Diavolo as being two souls within one body, but I haven't really given my personal opinion on Diavolo. Is he a great main antagonist? Absolutely. But amongst other JoJo's main antagonists, he might be on the lower end of the spectrum, not because he's a bad character, but this is JoJo's we're talking about. Every main antagonist has been phenomenal. Is he better than Dio? No. Dio is peak. Is he better than Kira? In my opinion, no. So that just leaves him in Cars, and I don't know. I liked Cars a lot. I've liked all of them a lot. That's the thing. Like, they've all been great. I will say Diavolo didn't feel like a threat in the same way that Kira felt like a threat, because Kira was a very insidious killer, and that's what I liked about Kira. That's what I loved about part 4. Did I get that vibe from Diavolo? No, but I got the vibe. But this is the big guy. This is the boss. Diavolo was so gassed up by literally everybody that we saw in part 5. Made him feel very grandiose. I like that feeling. Made it feel like we should revel in any type of screen time that we get with Diavolo in it, because Diavolo is not some guy that's easily accessible, so he naturally had this certain prestige about him that I liked. But that's the Diavolo, so that's not Doppio. there was nothing grandiose about Doppio, but he was funny. The moment where Doppio walks behind the pillar and we see Diavolo come out on the other side, loved that moment. That moment was so cool. So Diavolo, all in all, might not be my favorite main antagonist, but that's not to his detriment. It's a testament to how JoJo's is able to create peak after peak after peak villains. It's a shame the way he went out though. Went out quite sad. You know, he pretty much got subjected to, you know, eternal damnation. So for the most part, I think I've tackled all the main bullet points of part 5, but we have to talk about that final episode. You know, the one with the rock, Mista. Mista was trying so hard to get on my nerves that episode, but I believe the overarching point of the Rolling Stone stand, great stand name, is to drive home the fact that in JoJo's fate is inescapable. Bruno, Abbacchio, and Narancia's fate was sealed from the beginning. And I think my favorite part about this episode is the fact that it was placed at the very end, because originally I was like, okay, we beat Diavolo. What are these 2 episodes at the end? And then I watched it and I felt like that's the only way you could have ended part 5. That was the perfect ending. And if you had placed it before the Diavolo fight, then the viewer would have been left with the Diavolo fight as the last thing on their mind. Think about it. If the flashback with the Rolling Stone stand was shown before the Diavolo fight, you would have watched it, probably marinated on it for about 2 minutes, give or take, before you just moved on to the next episode and were overwhelmed by the sheer swag and legitness that Giorno versus Diavolo was. But the fact that it happens after the Diavolo fight, you get the awesomeness first, right? And then you get the main message of the story, and you have to sit on it. And if you are watching part 5 as it was airing, there is no next episode. You can't move on. You are forced to revel in that message in that episode. And it was 100% the right call in my opinion, because bottom line, part 5 was more about the message than it was about the action. So yeah, I'm pretty sure I hit all the main points about part 5. I didn't talk about the opening. I like the opening change. I would get a million comments of people telling me, you missed the opening. You know, I did before, but now I'm watching the openings, y'all. And shout out to David Production, because part 5 looks so fluid, and I wanted to shout them out in specific because they just did great work on Fire Force. And funny enough, that got me excited for part 7, because I can already imagine what they're gonna do with it. So yeah, it's on to part 6 now. I haven't heard a lot about part 6 as much as I have about part 5 and part 4. A lot of people recommending part 4, a lot of people recommending part 5. Not so many high on part 6. From what I've seen, it just seems to be overlooked when it comes to part 4 and part 5. But we'll get there. So yeah, part 5, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Phenomenal as always, JoJo's anime. I'm so glad I started this. If you made it this far and you enjoyed the video, please like, comment, or subscribe. All of those support the channel. But thank you guys for watching. I'll see y'all next time. Take care, y'all.